The wagon lurched violently over another rocky outcrop, and Naomi Zimmerman bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out as her shoulder slammed against the weathered wooden side for what felt like the 100th time that day. She had been traveling for 3 weeks now, having fled her aunt's house in St. Louis after one beating too many, and the small amount of money she had managed to steal before leaving was nearly gone. The wagon master had taken pity on her desperation and agreed to let her travel with the supply caravan heading toward the mining settlements in Colorado Territory. But that charity only extended to allowing her presence, not to providing any comfort. She slept on the hard ground each night with nothing but her threadbare dress and a thin shawl, shivering in the mountain air as they climbed higher into the Rockies during this summer of 1873. The other travelers mostly ignored her, though one of the teamsters had started giving her looks that made her skin crawl. She tried to stay close to the few families in the group, hoping their presence would discourage any unwanted attention. At 19 years old, she had learned to make herself small and unnoticeable, a skill acquired through years of living with relatives who saw her as little more than an unpaid servant after her parents had died of cholera when she was 12. The promises they had made to her dying father about caring for his daughter had been forgotten before he was even in the ground. The landscape around them grew more rugged and beautiful with each passing day. Towering pines reached toward the impossibly blue sky, and rocky peaks surrounded them on all sides. Naomi had never seen anything like it, having spent her entire life in the crowded, dirty streets of St. Louis. Despite her discomfort and uncertainty about what awaited her at journey's end, she could not help but feel a flutter of hope when she looked at these wild mountains. Perhaps here, in this untamed place, she might finally find a way to build a life of her own. The wagon train was headed for a supply depot that served several mining camps scattered throughout these mountains. Naomi had no real plan beyond reaching civilization and finding work, any work, that would allow her to survive. She could cook and clean and sew, skills that must surely be valuable even out here in the wilderness. She tried not to think too hard about what other kinds of work might be available to a young woman alone with no money or connections. She had heard stories about the mining towns and the desperate lives some women lived there. On the 23rd day of travel, disaster struck. The wagon train had been following a narrow trail along a steep mountainside when one of the lead wagons hit a hidden washout in the path. The driver lost control, and the wagon tipped, spilling its cargo of mining equipment down the rocky slope. The crash spooked the other teams, and chaos erupted as drivers fought to control their animals on the dangerous path. Naomi's wagon jerked forward suddenly as the mules panicked, and she was thrown clear off the back, landing hard on the rocky ground just at the edge of the trail. Pain exploded through her left ankle, and she gasped, rolling away from the edge instinctively, even as white-hot agony shot up her leg. Above her, she could hear shouting and the continued sounds of confusion, but the wagon train was already moving past her position. The drivers, too, focused on controlling their own teams to notice one passenger left behind. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, her breath knocked from her lungs by the fall. By the time she managed to drag herself to her feet, or rather to one foot, the wagon train was already disappearing around a bend in the trail. She tried to hop after them, but the moment she put any weight on her left ankle, the pain became so intense that black spots danced before her eyes. She sank back down onto the rocky ground, her whole body beginning to shake. They would notice she was missing. Someone would come back for her. She repeated this to herself like a prayer as she huddled against a boulder just off the trail, trying to find a position that did not make her ankle throb quite so violently. She had no food, no water, no blanket or supplies of any kind. Everything she had owned, which admittedly was not much, had been in the wagon that had continued on without her. The sun was still high in the sky when she was thrown from the wagon. She watched it arc slowly westward, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink as it descended, and still no one came back for her. As the light began to fail, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Naomi realized with growing horror that she might very well die here on this mountainside. Even if someone eventually noticed her absence, would they be able to find her again in the dark? Would they even bother to look? She wrapped her thin shawl more tightly around her shoulders and tried to think. The trail was clear enough. If she could somehow manage to walk on her injured ankle, perhaps she could make progress toward the supply depot. But when she tried once more to stand, the pain was so overwhelming that she nearly vomited. Her ankle was swelling now, the flesh turning an ugly purple color even in the dimming light. She was not going to be walking anywhere. The night sounds of the forest began to emerge as darkness fell. Owls hooted in the distance, and closer by, she could hear rustling in the underbrush that might have been small animals or might have been something larger. She had heard the teamsters talking about bears and mountain lions, told with the casual familiarity of men who knew these dangers were real. Naomi pressed herself more tightly against the boulder and tried very hard not to cry. Tears would accomplish nothing. She must have dozed eventually, exhaustion overcoming even her fear and pain, because she woke with a start to find the sky just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. She was so cold that her whole body felt stiff, and her ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. Her mouth was desperately dry, and her stomach ached with hunger, though the hunger was easier to ignore than the thirst. She knew she could survive several days without food, but without water, she would not last long in this dry mountain air. As the sun rose higher, Naomi forced herself to think practically about her situation. The trail was here, which meant people used it, which meant someone might eventually come along. She needed to stay visible, stay near the trail, and try to conserve what little strength she had left. She looked around for anything that might help her, but there was nothing but rocks and scrubby plants clinging to the mountainside. The sun climbed higher, and with it came heat that seemed almost cruel after the bitter cold of the night. Naomi's lips were cracking now, and her throat felt like sandpaper. She tried to distract herself by imagining what she would do when she was rescued, where she would go, what kind of life she might build. But as the day wore on with no sign of anyone on the trail, these fantasies began to feel hollow. It was late afternoon when she heard the sound of horse hooves on rock. Hope surged through her, and she called out, her voice little more than a croak. The hoofbeats stopped. She called again, louder this time, ignoring the way it made her raw throat burn. A figure appeared around the bend in the trail, and Naomi's first thought was that she must be hallucinating from thirst and exposure. The man who came into view looked like something from a frontier legend, tall and broad-shouldered, with long dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a full beard. He wore buckskin clothing and carried a rifle with practiced ease, and even from a distance, Naomi could see the powerful build of someone who lived a life of physical labor. He sat atop a sturdy bay horse and led a pack mule behind him. The man spotted her almost immediately and urged his horse forward. As he drew closer, Naomi could see his face more clearly. His features were weathered and tanned from years in the sun, with deep-set eyes that seemed to take in everything about her situation in a single glance. There was something in those eyes, an intelligence and awareness that made her feel suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled state. He dismounted in one smooth motion and approached her carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "Easy there," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I am not going to hurt you. Please," Naomi managed to whisper, "water." Without another word, the man unslung a canteen from his saddle and brought it to her. He held it carefully as she drank, his large hand steady. "Slow now," he cautioned when she tried to gulp it down. "You will make yourself sick." The water was the most wonderful thing Naomi had ever tasted. She forced herself to sip slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to drain the entire canteen. When the man finally pulled it away, she wanted to weep. "A bit more in a minute," he promised. "What happened to you? Where is the rest of your party?" Naomi explained about the wagon train accident, how she had been thrown clear and injured her ankle, how no one had come back for her. As she spoke, the man's expression grew darker. "They left you here." There was an edge of anger in his voice now. "A young woman, injured and alone." "I do not think they realized," Naomi said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. Everything was confusion with the accident. The man made a sound that suggested he had his own opinions about people who would not notice a missing member of their party, but he did not voice them. Instead, he knelt beside her and gently examined her ankle. His hands were large and calloused but surprisingly gentle as they probed the swollen flesh. "It is badly sprained, maybe broken," he said. "You cannot walk on this. We need to get you somewhere I can treat it properly." "The supply depot," Naomi said. "That is where the wagon train was headed." "Is it far?" "3 days' ride," the man said. "But you are in no condition for that journey, and that depot is no place for a woman alone anyway. Nothing there but rough men and rot-gut whiskey." He studied her face for a long moment, and Naomi had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing far more than she wanted to reveal. Then he seemed to come to some decision. "My cabin is half a day's ride from here," he said. "I have supplies there, proper medicine for that ankle. You can rest there until you are healed enough to decide what comes next." Naomi knew she should probably be wary of accepting such an offer from a strange man in the wilderness, but what choice did she have? She could not walk, had no food or water or shelter, and would certainly die if she remained here alone. At least this man had given her water and seemed genuinely concerned about her welfare. That was more kindness than many others had shown her. "Thank you," she said simply. The man nodded. "Name is Garrett Walker," he said. "Most folks call me Walker. I am a trapper, spend most of my time up in these mountains." "Naomi Zimmerman," she replied. "I was traveling to find work in the mining settlements." Something flickered across Walker's face at that, something that might have been sympathy or pity or concern. "We will worry about that later," he said. "Right now, we need to get you off this mountainside before another night falls." He was extraordinarily strong, Naomi discovered, as he carefully lifted her in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. The movement jostled her ankle, and she could not suppress a small cry of pain, but Walker murmured an apology and adjusted his grip to support her leg more carefully. He carried her to his horse, and somehow managed to mount while still holding her, settling her across his lap in a way that kept pressure off her injured ankle. "Hold on to me," he instructed, and Naomi wrapped her arms around his broad chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath the buckskin shirt. There was something strangely comforting about his strength, and the steady way he handled both her and the horse. She let her head rest against his shoulder, suddenly overwhelmed with exhaustion now that the immediate crisis had passed. They rode for hours as the sun sank lower in the sky. Naomi drifted in and out of awareness, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the warmth of Walker's body lulling her into a state that was not quite sleep, but not quite waking. She was dimly aware of the landscape changing around them, the trail becoming narrower and more overgrown, clearly less traveled than the main route the wagon train had followed. It was nearly dark when Walker finally said, "Almost there." Naomi roused herself enough to look around. They were in a small valley nestled between two mountain peaks, with a stream running through it that caught the last rays of sunlight. Trees surrounded the valley on all sides, providing shelter and privacy. And there, near the stream, stood a cabin. It was not a large structure, but it looked solid and well built, constructed of thick logs chinked carefully against the weather. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, suggesting Walker had left a fire banked before he departed on whatever journey he had been taking when he found her. Near the cabin stood a small barn, and a corral with several horses visible inside. Walker dismounted carefully, keeping Naomi secure in his arms, and carried her to the cabin door. He managed to work the latch with one hand and pushed the door open with his shoulder. The interior of the cabin was a single large room, but it was clean and surprisingly well organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cast iron stove set into it for cooking. Shelves lined another wall, stocked with supplies and equipment. There was a rough-hewn table with two chairs, and in one corner, something that made Naomi's breath catch: a bed. A real bed with a wooden frame and what looked like a thick mattress covered with furs. Walker noticed her reaction. "I built it last winter," he said, carrying her toward it. "Got tired of sleeping on the ground in my own home." He laid her down gently on the bed, and Naomi nearly wept at the softness beneath her. The furs were thick and plush, and the mattress, though likely filled with pine needles or straw, was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years. In her aunt's house, she had been given a thin pallet in the coldest corner of the attic, and before that, even the bed she had shared with her younger sister in their parents' home had been a simple straw tick. "I have never slept in a real bed before," she whispered without thinking, then immediately felt foolish for admitting such a thing. Walker paused in the act of adding wood to the fire and looked back at her. Something in his expression softened. "Well," he said quietly, "you can rest in that one as long as you need." He busied himself with stoking the fire and lighting several oil lamps, bringing warm light to the cabin. Then he brought her more water and some dried meat, insisting she eat slowly to avoid making herself sick. The food was tough and salty, but Naomi thought it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Once she had eaten and drunk her fill, Walker brought a basin of warm water and some clean cloth. "I need to look at that ankle properly," he said. "It is going to hurt." He was right. Even his gentle probing made Naomi bite down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. But Walker worked quickly and efficiently, his large hands surprisingly deft as he carefully removed her worn boot and stocking. The ankle looked even worse in the lamplight, swollen and discolored. "Definitely sprained, maybe a small break," Walker said. "I have seen worse. I'm going to wrap it, and you need to keep off it completely for at least a week, maybe two." He produced strips of clean cloth and some kind of salve that smelled strongly of herbs. As he worked, Naomi watched his face. He was handsome beneath the beard and the weather-worn features, she realized. There were lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was serious and focused. His hair, dark brown with hints of sun-bleached lighter strands, fell forward as he worked, and she noticed it was clean and well-kept despite his rough appearance. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the pain. "About 6 years," Walker replied. "Came west after the war, did not much care for cities or towns after what I had seen. Found these mountains and decided to stay." "Is it lonely?" He paused in his rapping and looked up at her. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer my own company to most folks." "Present company accepted," he added with a small smile. It was the first time Naomi had seen him smile, and it transformed his face entirely. The severity softened, and she could see warmth in those dark eyes. She found herself smiling back despite everything. Walker finished wrapping her ankle and sat back on his heels. There. That should help with the swelling. You need to rest now. Proper rest in a proper bed. Tomorrow we will see how it looks and go from there. Where will you sleep? Naomi asked, suddenly aware that there was only the one bed in the cabin. I have bedrolls aplenty, Walker said, gesturing to a corner where several thick rolls were stacked. And I have slept on harder ground than these floorboards. Do not worry about me. He seemed to mean it, but Naomi still felt guilty taking his bed. Before she could protest, however, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The warmth of the fire, the softness of the bed, the food in her stomach, and the relief of being safe all combined to pull her toward sleep. Thank you, she managed to say as her eyes drifted closed. You saved my life. Rest now, was all Walker said in response. Naomi sank into the soft furs and felt sleep claim her almost immediately. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. She woke several times during the night, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the lingering pain in her ankle. Each time, she would see Walker's form by the fire, either sitting and working on something or stretched out in his bedroll. Once, when she made a small sound of pain, he was beside the bed in an instant, offering water and checking her ankles, rapping with quiet efficiency, before settling back by the fire without complaint about being woken. When morning light finally filtered through the cabin's small windows, Naomi woke to the smell of coffee and cooking food. She opened her eyes to find Walker at the stove, working over a cast iron skillet. He must have heard her stirring because he glanced over. Morning, he said. How does the ankle feel? Naomi carefully assessed the damage. Her ankle still throbbed, but the sharp stabbing pain from yesterday had subsided somewhat. Better, I think, still very sore. That is to be expected. I am making breakfast, eggs and salt pork. Nothing fancy, but it will fill your stomach. How do you have eggs out here? Naomi asked, surprised. Walker gestured toward a door she had not noticed last night, presumably leading to the barn area. I keep a few chickens, and I have a milk cow. Man gets tired of eating nothing but game and dried meat. I like my coffee with cream and occasional biscuits. The idea of this rugged mountain man keeping chickens and a milk cow was somehow endearing. Naomi found herself smiling again, something she had not done much of in recent years. Walker brought her breakfast in bed, insisting she stay off her ankle. The eggs were perfectly cooked, and the salt pork, while simple, was delicious. He had even managed to produce actual butter for the biscuits he had made. Naomi ate slowly, savoring every bite. You are a good cook, she said. Man has to be, living alone, Walker replied. He settled at the table with his own breakfast and a cup of coffee that smelled so good Naomi nearly asked for some. As if reading her mind, Walker said, I have another cup if you want coffee. Please, if you do not mind sharing. He poured her coffee from the pot and brought it over, along with a small tin of sugar. No milk right now. Milked Bessie yesterday and the cream is still settling, but the sugar should help. Naomi added a tiny amount of the precious sugar and sipped the coffee. It was strong and hot and wonderful. She wrapped her hands around the tin cup and savored the warmth. Tell me about yourself, Walker said after a few moments of comfortable silence. What brought you out west alone? Naomi hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about Walker's steady presence and kind eyes made her want to be honest. My parents died when I was 12, she began. Cholera. I went to live with my mother's sister and her husband in St. Louis. They said they would care for me, but what they meant was they wanted a servant they did not have to pay. The work I did not mind so much, but my aunt, she had a cruel streak. If something went wrong, if she was in a bad mood, she would take it out on me. She saw Walker's jaw tighten, but he said nothing, just listened. A few weeks ago, my aunt broke a vase, one her mother had given her. She blamed me for putting it too close to the edge of the table. She hit me hard enough to knock me down, and something in me just broke. I realized I could not live like that anymore. So that night, I took what little money I could find and ran. I heard the wagon trains heading west needed people, that there was work in the mining towns. I thought maybe I could start over somewhere no one knew me. "You are 19, Walker asked. "Yes, as of 3 months ago. And you were going to a mining town alone with no money or connections." It was not a question, and there was a note of anger in his voice. "Do you have any idea what would have happened to you there?" "I can cook and clean and sew," Naomi said defensively. "Surely someone needs those skills." "Naomi." Walker set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "In a place like that depot, the only work readily available to a young woman alone is the kind that destroys her soul. Some men would have taken one look at you and seen nothing but a way to make money off your desperation. You would have ended up in a situation worse than the one you ran from." Naomi felt her cheeks flush, but she could not deny the truth of his words. She had known on some level what he was saying, but what choice had she had? "So what do I do?" she asked quietly. "I cannot go back to St. Louis. I would rather die." "You do not have to do anything right now," Walker said. "Right now you need to heal. After that we can figure out what comes next. Maybe there is a proper town somewhere with better opportunities. Maybe a family that needs help with children or a household, someone respectable." "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before Naomi could stop it. "You do not know me. You have no obligation to me. Yet you brought me to your home, gave me your bed, and you are feeding me and caring for me. Why?" Walker was quiet for a long moment. "I saw a lot of terrible things during the war," he finally said. "Saw what people are capable of doing to each other, the cruelty that men can inflict. When it was over, I came out here partly to get away from all that. But I made myself a promise that if I ever had the chance to help someone who truly needed it, I would. You needed help, so I helped. It is as simple as that." "It is not simple," Naomi said softly. "It is extraordinary. You are extraordinary." Walker looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just a man," he said. "Now finish your breakfast and then rest some more. That ankle needs time to heal." The days began to fall into a routine. Walker would rise early to tend his animals and check his trap lines in the nearby woods. Naomi would wake to find breakfast waiting and fresh water for washing. During the day, while Walker was occupied with his work, she would rest and watch the light move across the cabin walls, sometimes reading from the small collection of books Walker kept on his shelves. He had novels by Cooper and Dickens, a volume of Shakespeare, and several practical guides on wilderness survival and animal tracking. In the evenings, Walker would cook dinner and they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. Naomi learned that he had grown up in Ohio, the son of a farmer, and had fought for the Union during the war. He had seen action at Shiloh and Gettysburg and carried scars both visible and invisible from those battles. He spoke little of the war itself, but talked more freely about his life in the mountains, the animals he trapped, the changing seasons, the harsh winters and beautiful summers. Naomi, in turn, found herself sharing more about her own life than she had ever shared with anyone. She told him about her parents, how her father had been a clerk with dreams of opening his own business, how her mother had made the most beautiful embroidery. She told him about her younger sister, who had survived the cholera only to die 2 years later from pneumonia, while living with different relatives. She even told him about the small things that had brought her joy despite everything. Finding a wildflower growing in an alley, the way rain sounded on the roof, the feeling of accomplishment when she completed a particularly difficult bit of sewing. Walker listened to all of it with an attention that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. He never dismissed her feelings or told her she should be grateful for what little she had been given, the way her aunt always had. He simply listened and understood. As the week progressed, Naomi's ankle began to heal. The swelling went down significantly, and the discoloration faded. She could put a bit of weight on it now without the overwhelming pain. Walker checked it every day, rewrapping it carefully and applying more of his herbal salve. It was during one of these examinations that Naomi became acutely aware of how close Walker was, kneeling beside the bed with her foot cradled gently in his large hands. She could see the way his hair fell forward, the strength in his shoulders beneath the rough fabric of his shirt, the careful concentration on his face. Something fluttered in her chest, a feeling she had never experienced before. Walker looked up and caught her staring. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Walker carefully set her foot down and stood, putting distance between them. "It is healing well," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Another week and you should be able to walk on it again, at least short distances." Naomi just nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, she lay in the soft bed surrounded by furs and tried to understand what she was feeling. She had never been courted, never had a young man pay her attention. Her aunt had made sure of that, keeping her isolated and working constantly. But the feelings stirring in her when she looked at Walker, when he spoke to her or smiled that rare smile, were unmistakable. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. She barely knew this man. He had shown her kindness, but that did not mean he felt anything beyond basic human compassion for someone in need. And even if he did feel something for her, what future could there be for them? She had nothing to offer, no dowry, no family connections, nothing but a willingness to work hard. But despite all the logical reasons why she should not allow herself to feel this way, Naomi could not seem to stop the warmth that spread through her when Walker was near. The way her heart beat faster when he smiled at her, the sense of safety and home that she felt in his presence. The second week brought a change in weather. Dark clouds rolled in over the mountains and the temperature dropped noticeably. Walker spent extra time gathering firewood and checking his supplies. "Storm coming," he told Naomi. "A big one by the feel of it. We might be stuck inside for a few days once it hits." "Will we have enough food?" Naomi asked. Walker actually laughed at that. "I have enough supplies stored to last through the entire winter without needing to hunt or trap. A week-long storm is nothing. I am more concerned about you getting restless, cooped up inside." "I spent months cooped up in my aunt's attic," Naomi said. "At least here I have someone pleasant to talk to and windows to look out of." The storm hit that night with a fury that took Naomi's breath away. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning illuminated the cabin in brilliant flashes. Rain pounded on the roof with such force that conversation became nearly impossible. Walker sat by the fire, calmly repairing some piece of leather equipment, seemingly unbothered by the chaos outside. Naomi, however, found herself tensing with each crack of thunder. She tried not to show her fear, but when a particularly loud boom shook the cabin, she could not suppress a small gasp. Walker looked over and saw her white-knuckled grip on the furs. Without a word, he set aside his work and moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "Storms frighten you?" he asked gently. "They never used to," Naomi admitted. "But during the cholera epidemic, there was a terrible storm. So many people died that night, including my mother." I know it is foolish, but storms remind me of that night. It is not foolish, Walker said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, and his grip was strong without being crushing. Storms are powerful things. It makes sense to have healthy respect for them. That is a kind way of saying I am being childish, Naomi said with a weak smile. You are not childish. You are human. Walker gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Would it help if I stayed here, talked to you? Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. Walker settled more comfortably on the edge of the bed, still holding her hand, and began to talk. He told her stories about his childhood, about learning to track animals with his grandfather, about a particularly stubborn mule his father had owned. His voice was deep and steady and soothing, and gradually, Naomi found her fear receding. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke in the morning to find the storm still raging but less intense. Walker was back by the fire making breakfast, but when he saw her wake, he smiled at her in a way that made her heart skip. The storm continued for 3 more days. The cabin felt smaller with both of them confined inside, but not in an unpleasant way. They talked for hours, played card games with a worn deck Walker produced, and read aloud to each other from his books. Naomi taught him how to do a simple embroidery stitch, laughing at his large fingers struggling with the delicate work. Walker taught her how to identify different animal tracks from drawings in one of his guides. By the 2nd day of the storm, Naomi was able to walk short distances with only a slight limp. She insisted on helping with meals and tidying the cabin, needing to feel useful after so many days of being waited on. Walker protested at first but eventually accepted her help, though he hovered nearby any time she was on her feet, ready to catch her if she stumbled. On the 3rd night of the storm, they sat together by the fire after dinner. Walker was whittling a piece of wood, and Naomi was attempting to repair a tear in one of his shirts with some thread and a needle he had provided. The rain had softened to a steady patter on the roof, almost musical in its rhythm. "What will you do when the storm ends?" Walker asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Naomi set down her sewing and stared into the fire. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I still need to find work somewhere. A respectable position, as you said. There is a town called San Angelo down in Texas," Walker said slowly. "I have been there once. It is a real town with families and churches and proper businesses, not a rough mining camp. There might be opportunities there for someone willing to work." "Texas is a long way from here," Naomi said. "It is. Would you take me there?" She turned to look at him. "I have no money to pay you for your trouble, but I could work for you, cook and clean and help with your animals until you felt the debt was repaid." Walker set down his whittling and met her eyes. "You do not owe me anything, Naomi. If I take you to San Angelo, it will be because I want to help you, not because of any debt." "Then why would you do it? It would take weeks, maybe months to make such a journey. Why would you disrupt your entire life for me?" Walker was quiet for a long moment. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful expression in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because the thought of you leaving fills me with dread," he said. "Because these past 2 weeks have been the happiest I have known in years. Because when I look at you, I see not just a woman who needed help, but someone I want to know better, to spend time with, to maybe build something with. I know I have no right to say these things. You are young and have your whole life ahead of you. You deserve better than a rough mountain man living in isolation. But you asked me why, and that is the truth of it." Naomi's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Walker must be able to hear it. "You think I deserve better than you. she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Garrett, you are the best man I have ever known. You are kind and patient and strong. You listened to me when no one else ever did. You made me feel safe for the first time since my parents died. You gave me your bed and filled it with soft furs." "How could I possibly deserve better than that?" Walker stared at her, something like hope dawning in his eyes. "Naomi." "I do not want to go to San Angelo," she continued, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "I do not want to find work with some family in a town I do not know. I want to stay here, with you, if you will have me." "If I will have you," Walker repeated, and then he laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Naomi, having you here has been like discovering I was living in darkness and suddenly someone lit a lamp. But I have to know that you are sure. This is a hard life up here. The winters are brutal. We would be alone most of the time, miles from the nearest neighbor. You would be giving up any chance of a normal life, of living in a town with other people your age, of having the things most women want." "I do not want what most women want," Naomi said firmly. "I want a home where I am valued. I want to wake up feeling safe. I want to spend my days with someone who makes me laugh and challenges me to think and looks at me like I matter. I want all of those things, and I have found them here with you. That is what I am sure of." Walker moved then, sliding off the edge of the bed to kneel before her, taking both of her hands in his. "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Not because I doubt your feelings, but because I need you to be absolutely certain." Naomi nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "Naomi Zimmerman, would you consider becoming my wife? Would you stay here with me, build a life with me, face whatever comes together? I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more sure of anything. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you sitting on that mountainside, hurt and scared but still trying to be brave." Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Garrett. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." Walker surged forward and pulled her into his arms, careful of her still healing ankle. Naomi wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight, feeling his strength surround her, his heartbeat steady against her chest. When he pulled back enough to look at her face, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I am going to kiss you now," he said softly, "if that is all right." "It is more than all right," Naomi whispered. His lips met hers gently, carefully, as though she were something precious that might break. But as Naomi kissed him back, the kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate. His arms tightened around her, and she let herself melt into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished and utterly loved. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Walker rested his forehead against hers. "We will have to wait until your ankle is fully healed before we can make the trip to find a preacher," he said. "But we are getting properly married. I want to do this right." "Where is the nearest preacher?" Naomi asked. "There is a missionary circuit rider who comes through the area every few months. He should be in the settlement about 2 days' ride from here within the next few weeks. We can meet him there and have him perform the ceremony." "I do not have a proper dress," Naomi said, suddenly aware of her threadbare clothing. "You could wear a flour sack and you would still be the most beautiful bride," Walker said, but he was smiling. "Though if it matters to you, there is a seamstress in that settlement. We could get you a proper dress." "I do not need anything fancy," Naomi said. "Just something clean and whole." The storm finally broke the next morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the sunshine. Walker ventured out to check on his animals and survey any damage, while Naomi tested her ankle with short walks around the cabin. It was still tender, but she could put her full weight on it now without the sharp pain. Over the following week, as Naomi's ankle healed completely, She and Walker began to plan their future in earnest. Walker showed her all aspects of his operation: the trap lines he maintained, the best fishing spots in the nearby streams, where he gathered wild berries and herbs, how to milk Bessie the cow and collect eggs from the chickens. Naomi absorbed it all eagerly, determined to be a true partner to him rather than a burden. She also began to put her own stamp on the cabin. Walker had built shelves but never organized them properly, so she spent a happy afternoon arranging supplies logically. She sewed new curtains for the windows from some spare cloth Walker had, brightening the space. She even started a small herb garden in a sunny spot near the cabin, transplanting wild mint and other useful plants she found growing nearby. Walker watched all of this with a mixture of amusement and what looked like wonder. "You are making it a real home," he said one evening, looking around at the changes she had wrought. "It already was a home," Naomi corrected. "I am just adding some finishing touches." 3 weeks after Walker had found her on the mountainside, they made the journey to the settlement to meet the circuit preacher. Naomi wore the best dress that could be created on short notice. A simple calico the seamstress had sold them for a reasonable price, altered to fit Naomi's slight frame. Walker wore his cleanest buckskins and had trimmed his beard neatly. The settlement was barely worthy of the name, just a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads. But the preacher was there, an elderly man named Reverend Thomas, who asked no questions about their hasty courtship. He had been performing marriages on the frontier long enough to know that people found each other in unexpected ways out here. The ceremony was brief and simple, performed in the small room the settlement used as a makeshift church. There were no guests beyond the seamstress and the owner of the general store, who served as witnesses. But when Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, and Walker kissed her gently while the witnesses applauded, Naomi felt a joy so complete it took her breath away. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, finally sharing the bed that Walker had built. He was gentle and patient, and when Naomi confessed her nervousness, he took extra care to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms surrounded by the soft furs, Naomi thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. "What are you thinking?" Walker asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "That I am glad the wagon train left me behind," Naomi said. "Is that terrible to say?" "No," Walker said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I understand what you mean. Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best things." Summer gave way to autumn, and Naomi discovered she loved life in the mountains. The work was hard but satisfying in a way that her drudgery in her aunt's house had never been. Here, she could see the direct results of her labor. Meals prepared from ingredients they had grown or hunted themselves, a warm and tidy home, a garden that flourished under her care. Walker taught her to shoot and to fish, to identify edible plants and to read the signs of changing weather. They talked endlessly, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. Walker told her more about his time in the war, things he had never spoken of to anyone else. Naomi told him about the guilt she still carried over her sister's death, how she had always wondered if she could have done something more to save her. They shared their pain and their joy, and in doing so, grew closer than Naomi had ever imagined two people could be. The first snow came in late October, earlier than Walker had expected. He spent several days making sure they had enough firewood split and stacked, that the barn was secure, and the animals had adequate shelter. Naomi helped where she could and watched in fascination as the world transformed into a wonderland of white. "Wait until January," Walker said when she expressed her delight at the snowfall. "You will be sick of snow by then." But Naomi never grew sick of it. Even when the drifts piled high against the cabin walls and venturing outside required strapping on the snowshoes Walker had made. She loved the way the snow muffled sound, creating a peaceful silence broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the crack of a tree branch under the weight of ice. She loved the way the world looked on clear winter days, the sun glinting off snow-covered peaks so bright it hurt to look at them directly. They spent the long winter evenings together by the fire, Walker working on various repairs and projects while Naomi sewed or read aloud from their small library of books. They played checkers and cards, told stories, made love in their warm bed while the wind howled outside. Naomi had never been happier. It was in February, as the worst of the winter began to loosen its grip, that Naomi realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was perhaps due to the change in her circumstances, the different food and harder physical labor. But as the days passed, and she began to experience other telltale signs, she could no longer deny the truth. She was carrying Walker's child. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of having a baby with the man she loved. But also fear, because she remembered all too well how her mother had struggled through difficult pregnancies, because childbirth was dangerous even under the best circumstances, and they were miles from any doctor or midwife. She told Walker one evening after dinner, the words tumbling out nervously, "I think I am with child." Walker went very still. Then he crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "As certain as I can be without a doctor. I have all the signs." Walker pulled back to look at her face, and she was stunned to see tears on his cheeks. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy about this?" Naomi asked, relief washing through her. "Happy." "Naomi, I am overwhelmed, terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." He cupped her face gently in his large hands. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Naomi said firmly. "Yes, I am. I am frightened too, but I want this. I want our child." "I will take care of you," Walker promised. "Both of you. I will make sure you have everything you need." He kept that promise with a dedication that made Naomi fall in love with him all over again. As her belly began to swell with the growing child, Walker took over the heavier chores without complaint. He brought her special foods when she experienced morning sickness, held her when the fatigue overwhelmed her, rubbed her feet when they ached. He even began making a cradle, carving it from smooth pine and working on it every evening with infinite care. Spring arrived, and with it came the circuit preacher again. Walker arranged for the man to stop at their cabin, wanting him to check on Naomi and provide what advice he could about the upcoming birth. Reverend Thomas examined her as best he could and declared her healthy and strong. "I have delivered a few babies in my time," he told them. "If you can get word to me when her time comes near, I can try to be here to help." But they lived too far from any settlement for such arrangements to be reliable. Instead, Walker spent weeks learning everything he could about childbirth, consulting the medical guides he could borrow from the few neighbors they had in the area. He gathered supplies and made plans, determined to be ready. Summer came, and Naomi's belly grew round and heavy. The baby moved vigorously, and she would often catch Walker with his hand on her stomach, feeling the kicks with an expression of wonder on his face. They talked about names, debated whether it would be a boy or girl, made plans for the future of their growing family. "Whatever happens," Naomi told Walker one night as they lay in bed, the baby kicking against both their hands, "I want you to know that I have been happy. These months with you have been the best of my life." "Nothing is going to happen," Walker said fiercely. "You are strong and healthy, and I am going to be right here with you. We are both going to be fine." Naomi wanted to believe him, and most days she did. But as her time drew nearer, she could not quite shake the fear that whispered in the back of her mind, reminding her of all the women who did not survive childbirth, all the babies who never drew their first breath. Her labor began on a warm August evening, nearly a year to the day after Walker had found her on that mountainside. The first pains were mild, and Naomi almost thought she was imagining them. But as the hours passed and the pains grew stronger and more regular, there was no doubt about what was happening. Walker remained calm, though Naomi could see the fear in his eyes. He helped her into the bed they shared, making sure she was comfortable among the soft furs. He brought water and cold cloths, held her hand through the contractions, encouraged her when she grew tired and frightened. The labor was long and difficult. All through the night and into the next day, Naomi struggled to bring their child into the world. There were moments when she thought she could not go on, when the pain became so intense that she wanted to give up. But Walker stayed with her through all of it, his strength and presence the anchor that kept her from being swept away by fear and exhaustion. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a bit longer. I am right here with you." When the final moment came, when the baby finally slipped free in a rush of fluid and relief, Naomi heard the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, her child's first cry. Walker, his hands shaking, carefully cleaned the baby and wrapped it in soft cloths they had prepared. "It is a boy," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Naomi, we have a son." He placed the tiny bundle in her arms, and Naomi looked down at the small, red face of her baby. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown like his father's. He stopped crying when she held him close, seeming to recognize her voice when she murmured to him. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Walker sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Naomi and one finger grasping the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" he asked. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son's face, Naomi knew. "James," she said, "James Walker, after your father." Walker's eyes filled with tears. "My father would have been honored," he said softly. "James it is." The months following James's birth were exhausting but filled with joy. Naomi recovered from the birth more quickly than she had feared, and she took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Walker was a devoted father, getting up with her in the night to help with the baby, carrying James in a sling while he did his work so Naomi could rest, singing to the baby in his deep voice that seemed to soothe James instantly. They had added furs to the baby's cradle, keeping him warm and comfortable. Walker had even built a smaller bed next to their own, anticipating when James would grow too big for the cradle but still too young to sleep alone. As James grew from infant to baby, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy child, quick to smile and laugh, and clearly adored both his parents. He looked like Walker, with his dark hair and strong features, but he had Naomi's blue eyes and her determined expression. "He is going to be stubborn," Walker said one day, watching James determinedly try to crawl toward a toy that was just out of reach. "Gets that from his mother." "Me," Naomi laughed. "Have you met yourself? You are the most stubborn man I have ever known." "Well, then he is doomed to be stubborn," Walker said cheerfully. "Poor child with parents like us." But there was nothing but love in his voice, and Naomi felt her heart swell with contentment. This was the life she had dreamed of but never thought she would have. A home, a husband who loved her, a beautiful child, and the security of knowing she was valued and cherished. 2 years after James's birth, Naomi found herself pregnant again. This second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because her body had already been through the process once. Walker was just as attentive, but now they had James to consider as well, a rambunctious 2-year-old who kept them both busy. Their daughter was born on a cold November day, arriving much more quickly than James had. She had Naomi's fair coloring and what promised to be her mother's delicate features, though she possessed her father's strong will even from the beginning. "What should we name her?" Walker asked, cradling his tiny daughter with the same wonder he had shown with James. "Rose," Naomi said. "After my mother, Rose Walker." They settled into their new life as a family of 4. The cabin felt fuller now, filled with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Walker built a small addition to give the children their own sleeping area, and Naomi made curtains to divide the space, creating privacy. The children's beds were filled with soft furs, just like their parents' bed, keeping them warm through the cold mountain nights. James proved to be a natural big brother, protective of his baby sister even at his young age. He would bring her toys and stroke her soft hair, and as Rose grew older, she followed him everywhere, clearly adoring her big brother. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. James learned to walk and talk, and eventually to help his father with small chores. Rose grew from baby to toddler, her personality emerging as sunny and sweet, but with a core of strength that promised she would never let anyone push her around. A third child joined them when James was 5. Another boy they named Thomas after the circuit preacher who had married them and who still visited occasionally. Naomi sometimes thought about how different her life might have been if that wagon train had not left her behind, if Walker had not found her on that mountainside. She might have ended up in one of those mining camps, living a desperate existence. Or she might have died alone on that trail, her body never found. Instead, she was here in these beautiful mountains with a husband who loved her and children who filled her days with purpose and joy. The work was never easy. Mountain winters were harsh, and there were years when supplies ran low, when illness threatened, when the isolation felt overwhelming. But they faced it all together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. Walker proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He taught his sons to trap and hunt and fish, to read the weather and track animals. He taught Rose these same skills, refusing to treat her differently because she was a girl. "Out here," he told Naomi, "everyone needs to know how to take care of themselves." Naomi taught all the children to read and write, using the small collection of books they had accumulated over the years. She taught them arithmetic and geography, determined that they would have an education even living so far from any school. She taught Rose to sew and cook, but she also taught James and Thomas these skills, wanting all her children to be capable and self-sufficient. 10 years after they married, Walker and Naomi sat on the porch he had built onto the cabin, watching their children play in the meadow nearby. James, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Rose how to identify different bird calls, while 4-year-old Thomas attempted to catch grasshoppers in the tall grass. "Did you ever imagine we would have all this?" Naomi asked, leaning against Walker's shoulder. "No," Walker admitted. "Before I found you, I thought I would live my whole life alone up here. I was content with that, or I thought I was. But now I cannot imagine life without you, without our children, without all the noise and chaos and love that fills our home." "I never thought I would find a real home," Naomi said quietly. "I spent so many years feeling unwanted, like I was just taking up space in the world. And then you built me a bed and filled it with soft furs, and it was the first time in my life I felt like I mattered to someone. Like I deserved comfort and care." Walker pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, You deserved all that and more. You still do. You are the strongest, bravest, most amazing woman I have ever known. I thank God every day that I was on that trail when you needed help." "It was not just that you helped me," Naomi said. "It was how you helped me. You saw me, really saw me, and you treated me like I was valuable, like I was worth saving. That changed everything for me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play. Rose had climbed a tree and was calling down to her brothers, her laugh ringing clear across the meadow. Thomas was showing James the grasshopper he had finally managed to catch, both boys' heads bent together over the insect. "We did well," Walker said softly. "Look at them. They are happy and healthy and loved. They know they are wanted. That is the greatest gift we can give them." "It is the gift you gave me," Naomi replied, "and I will spend the rest of my life grateful for it." The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Walker called the children in for supper, and they came running, James carrying Thomas on his back while Rose raced ahead. They burst into the cabin with all the energy of young children, talking over each other about their adventures, and Naomi moved to serve the meal she had prepared earlier. After supper, as was their custom, they gathered by the fire. Walker told stories about his childhood, or about animals he had encountered in his trapping, or sometimes he simply read aloud from one of their books. The children would grow drowsy in the warmth, and one by one, Naomi would tuck them into their beds, pulling the soft furs up to their chins and kissing their foreheads. Then she and Walker would have a few quiet hours to themselves. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in companionable silence, sometimes they made love in their own bed surrounded by the furs that had been there from the beginning. And every night, before sleep claimed her, Naomi would think about how grateful she was for the turn her life had taken. Years continued to pass. Their children grew and eventually began lives of their own. James, at 17, began making trips to the settlements, learning to trade and eventually meeting a young woman who captured his heart. Rose, fierce and independent at 15, announced her intention to become a teacher and began studying even more seriously. Thomas, at 13, showed signs of becoming an even better trapper than his father. Through it all, Walker and Naomi remained the center of their family. They had aged, of course. There was silver in Walker's dark hair now and lines around Naomi's eyes. But the love between them had only deepened with time, strengthened by shared challenges and joys. On their 20th anniversary, Walker presented Naomi with a gift he had been working on in secret, a quilt made from pieces of all their clothing over the years. There were scraps from her wedding dress, from the children's baby clothes, from Walker's old shirts. He had sewn it all together himself, his large hands somehow managing the delicate work. "I wanted you to have something that represented our life together," he said as she unfolded it with tears in her eyes. "Every piece tells a story. Here is the dress you wore when James was born. This is from the shirt I was wearing the day we met. This is from Rose's first dress. All our memories, stitched together." Naomi could not speak through her tears. She pulled Walker into a fierce embrace. This man who had saved her life in every way that mattered, who had given her a home and a family, and a love she had never dreamed possible. They spread the quilt on their bed, on top of the furs that were now worn but still soft, and made love with the passion and tenderness of people who knew each other completely and loved each other deeply. As Naomi lay in Walker's arms afterward, listening to his steady heartbeat, she thought about the girl she had been 20 years ago. Desperate, injured, alone on a mountainside with no hope for the future. That girl could never have imagined the life Naomi had now, the richness and fullness of it, the love that surrounded her every day. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Walker asked, his arms tightening around her. "For building me a bed," Naomi said. "For filling it with soft furs. For seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. For loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Walker replied. "For trusting me. For building this life with me. For giving me a family I never knew I wanted but cannot imagine living without. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Naomi." "Never doubt that." They fell asleep as they had every night for 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe and loved. The children eventually left home one by one, though they visited often and remained close. James married his sweetheart and built his own cabin not far from his parents' home. Rose went away to study, but returned eventually, teaching at a small school in a nearby settlement. Thomas took over much of Walker's trap lines, working alongside his aging father. Grandchildren arrived, filling the cabin with young voices again. Walker and Naomi delighted in their new role, spoiling the grandchildren in ways they had never spoiled their own children. They told stories about the old days, about how Naomi had been found injured on a mountainside and how they had fallen in love. Grandma had never slept in a real bed before, one grandchild asked in amazement. "Never," Naomi confirmed. "But your grandfather built me one and filled it with the softest furs. It was the first place I ever felt truly at home." "Because of the bed?" the child asked. "Because of the man who made it," Naomi replied, smiling at Walker across the room. "Because he saw that I needed comfort and care, and he provided it without asking for anything in return. That is what real love looks like." More years passed. Walker's hair turned fully white and his steps grew slower, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at Naomi. Her hands grew gnarled with age, making sewing difficult, but she still insisted on mending Walker's shirts and making quilts for each new grandchild. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the cabin overflowing with family. James had brought fresh game. Rose had made a beautiful cake despite her busy schedule, and Thomas had carved a special gift for each of his parents. The grandchildren performed a little play they had created about how their grandparents met, with much giggling and improvisation. As the sun set that evening and the family began to disperse to their own homes, Walker and Naomi sat once again on their porch, watching the mountains turn purple in the twilight. 30 years, Walker said wonderingly. "It feels like no time at all, and yet I can barely remember life before you." "I cannot remember it at all," Naomi said. "Or rather, I choose not to. My life began the day you found me, as far as I am concerned. Everything before that was just marking time." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands as they had countless times over the decades. Finally, Walker spoke again. "I want you to know something," he said. "If I had the chance to live my life over to make different choices, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, because every choice led me to that trail on that day when I found you. And finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my whole world," Naomi said simply. "You and our family, this place, this life we built together. I have been so blessed, Garrett, so incredibly blessed." They watched the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars they had watched together for 30 years, and felt the deep contentment of two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other. As the years continued to pass and they grew older still, their children worried about them living alone in the mountains. James especially urged them to move closer to town, where there would be neighbors and doctors nearby. But Walker and Naomi refused. "This is our home," Walker said firmly. "We built our life here. We will end it here." And so they remained in their mountain cabin, supporting each other through the challenges that age brought. When Walker's knees grew too stiff to check all his trap lines, Thomas took over that work entirely. When Naomi's eyesight grew dim, Rose came regularly to help with tasks that required careful vision. But the couple insisted on maintaining their independence as much as possible, determined to live on their own terms. They had been married 42 years when Walker fell ill. It was a cold winter, and the cough that started small grew progressively worse. Naomi nursed him with all the skill and determination she possessed, but they both knew this was an illness that care alone could not cure. On a quiet February evening, with snow falling softly outside and Naomi sitting beside him on their bed, Walker took her hand. "I am not afraid," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I have lived a good life, a full life with you." "Do not talk like that," Naomi said, though her voice shook. "You are going to get better, Naomi." He squeezed her hand gently. "We both know that is not true, and it is all right. I am ready. I just need to know that you will be all right." "I will never be all right without you," Naomi said, tears streaming down her face. "You are my heart, Garrett. My home. How am I supposed to go on without you?" "The same way you have faced every challenge in your life," Walker said. "With strength and courage. Our children need you. Our grandchildren need you. And somewhere deep inside, you are still that brave girl who survived being abandoned on a mountainside. You will survive this too." "I do not want to survive it," Naomi sobbed. "I want you to stay with me." "I will always be with you," Walker promised. "Every time you lie down in our bed, wrapped in these furs, I will be there. Every time you look at our children and grandchildren, you will see me in them. I am not really leaving, my love. I am just changing form." He died that night peacefully, with Naomi holding his hand and whispering her love to him until his last breath. The children came when word was sent, and they mourned together, celebrating a life well lived while grieving the loss of a beloved father and husband. They buried Walker on a hill overlooking the valley, where he could watch over the cabin and the life he had built. Naomi stood at the grave long after the others had returned to the cabin, talking to him as though he could still hear her. "Thank you," she said through her tears. "Thank you for every day, every moment, every kindness. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for our family. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Wait for me, my darling. I will find you again." The months after Walker's death were the hardest of Naomi's life. The cabin felt empty without his presence, and she found herself listening for his voice, looking for him in the places he had always been. But slowly, with the support of her children and the passage of time, she began to heal. She remained in the cabin, refusing all offers to move in with one of her children. This was her home, the place where she had been happy, and she would not abandon it. James and Thomas took turns staying with her, making sure she had everything she needed. Rose visited regularly, bringing her grandchildren to fill the cabin with life and laughter again. Naomi lived for 3 more years after Walker's death. They were good years in many ways, filled with family and memories and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She made quilts for each of her grandchildren, passing on her skills and her stories. She taught them about their grandfather, about the kind of man he had been, about the love that had sustained them both through 4 decades of marriage. On a warm spring evening, surrounded by budding flowers and the sound of birds singing, Naomi lay down in the bed Walker had built for her all those years ago. She pulled the soft furs up around her shoulders and closed her eyes, feeling utterly at peace. Her children found her the next morning, a peaceful smile on her face. On the table beside the bed was a letter she had written, her handwriting shaky but still legible. "My beloved children," it read, "do not grieve too much for me. I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams, filled with more love and happiness than I ever thought possible. Your father saved me in every way a person can be saved, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift. I am ready now to see him again. Bury me beside him on the hill, where we can watch over this valley together for all eternity. And remember always that love is the greatest gift we can give or receive. Hold your own families close. Build your own beds and fill them with softness and comfort. Create homes where people feel safe and valued. That is the legacy your father and I want to leave you. We love you all now and always. Your loving mother, Naomi. They buried her on the hill next to Walker, and the whole valley seemed to mourn her passing. But there was joy, too, in celebrating a life that had been so full, a love that had been so deep, a legacy that would continue through children and grandchildren and generations to come. Years later, James's grandson would bring his own children to see the two graves on the hill. He would tell them the story of how their great-great-grandfather had found their great-great-grandmother injured and alone, how he had taken her home and cared for her, how he had built her a bed and filled it with soft furs because she had never known real comfort before. They loved each other very much, he would say. And they built a life together here in these mountains that lasted through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard times. They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day, a commitment to care for someone else even when it is difficult. That is the kind of love worth having. And the children would look at the two graves side by side, at the mountains rising behind them and the valley spread out below, and they would understand that some love stories never really end. They live on in the people left behind, in the lessons taught and the memories shared, in the way love itself seems to linger in places where it was deeply felt. The cabin still stood for many years after, maintained by the family who visited regularly and sometimes stayed there, sleeping in beds filled with soft furs and feeling the presence of the two people who had made this place a home. And though Walker and Naomi were gone, their love remained, as much a part of these mountains as the trees and streams and eternal peaks reaching toward the sky.